How many of you can grab a hold of God's grace in a little different way?
Yes.
You know what I love about that story that is sharing with Abraham? Think about these kings. We're talking kings. A number of kings comes against this city. And who's Abraham? He's some business guy that sets up out in the fields, outside of the city, totally unrelated to the situation. He doesn't care how big the enemy is. How many of us take a look at the enemy and we go, oh, I can't do that. And Abraham rallies together a bunch of farmers, people who care for livestock. They grab their tools, their hoes, their rakes, their little sheep herder sticks, and they go out to conquer this massive enemy, this massive force. And he does it like it's nothing. You know, David was a king who reigned in that same place and understood God's empowering grace. And you know, grace is just a force from God that empowers you to overcome the obstacles that would normally be in your way. David understood this. And David starts marching on the city. And he's looking to take the city to be a capital of the new kingdom of Israel. And there's these Jebusites people sitting on the wall laughing at him because this city had been impenetrable. And there's really no definition of the battle except one phrase. Nevertheless, David took the city. End of story. There's a man who understands God's grace, who understands that if God has given you a task to do, there is nothing that should be standing in your way. And if it does stand in your way, and you let it back you down, whose fault is it? If God has empowered you, and He has told you that you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength, where does His Spirit dwell? Within me. Everybody say that. God's Spirit is within me. Greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world. God is raising up an army right now. There is a transition coming in our world. The stage is set for a global economic reset.
Right.
How many of you are looking at the news and the economy now?
Oh, yeah.
How many of you truly understand what's going on? Let me give you the watered down, very simple version. Are you ready? You've got a choice to look at this information one way that will say, oh no, I don't know what's going to happen, and it's going to put you in fear. And you've got a chance to look at it another way, to recognize what God is doing and to get excited about it. Because what you're getting here from us this weekend is empowering you to be ready and to be a part of God's move that He is setting the stage for on a global economic reset. Are you ready? Are you really ready?
Yes.
In our world today, we have the banking system that I talked about yesterday, where wealth is created by debt. Money is created by debt. We have Federal Reserve type banking structures in big countries around the world. And the basic principle of this works like we talked about yesterday. The Reserve Bank generates money, which it then inputs into the coffers that are distributed through the banking system into the nation. But that's all generated as a debt that then must be paid back. And they do such a way to stimulate the economy to create an inflation that outpaces the rate of the interest that they're charging against this debt. And everything works great as long as they can stimulate the economy to grow faster than the interest rate. This is why we can have politicians on Capitol Hill today saying budgets don't matter. And they haven't even worried about passing a budget here in the States in how many years? Because they don't care. Because they believe that this system of creating an economy based on debt has no end. I really believe that they know there's an end coming and they're just trying to avoid it.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got right now the US, the UK, Sweden, the Eurozone, Japan, all with central banking systems that have been artificially stimulating their economy by flooding their market with money that generates higher debt and deficits. They're basically trying to borrow themselves out of debt. How does that work on your personal budget? If you owe $10,000 on your personal budget And now you've got a $250 a month payment, and that's strapping you for everything you can get. So in order to do that, you go borrow another $10,000. Now you don't have a $250 a month payment. Now you got a $500 a month payment. So you're able to do that for a while until that $10,000 runs out. Now what do? Do you keep borrowing and keep that cycle going? That's what our governments are doing. China's doing another form where they're stimulating their economy. You want to have real fun? Google the ghost cities of China. Here is the second biggest economy in the world that is building these cities. They're trying to go by the philosophy of, if we build it, they will come. So they build these massive cities trying to get farmers to relocate from their farmlands, from the urban places, or from the suburban, rural, there we go. I am not an English major, it's my daughter's job. Trying to relocate from the rural farmlands into the suburban cities. There's stories of shopkeepers that open up stores in hopes of the people that will come, and then they end up going broke because there's nobody that comes to shop in these empty cities. They're artificially stimulating their economy, and in doing so, they're also creating debt that must be repaid. They're creating an infrastructure they cannot support. So we have 6 of the world's biggest economies all doing something wonky with their finances that equals trying to borrow themselves out of debt. How long can that building stand? Talk about a house of cards. When our economy fell in 2008, God wakes me up and he tells me, you think it's bad now? You just wait. It's going to look like it's going to get better for a little while, and then it's going to get a whole lot worse. This is necessary. Why is it necessary? Because this gives an opportunity for God to show off. So if we've got this economic famine, famine today relates to our economy the same way that famine related to drought in the Bible. The economy in the days that the Bible was written was an agroeconomic society. If there was no rain, then there would be no crops. Today, with the knowledge that God has blessed us with, we're able to irrigate, we're able to grow hydroponic gardens that produce a lot of food, and our economy has shifted from an agroeconomic society to a money-driven economic society. So now a famine is a shortage of available funds. Did we see a warning blip in 2008 when suddenly money became unavailable? Was there any less money in distribution? No. What happened? Credit markets dried up. People couldn't borrow anymore. If they couldn't borrow, they couldn't buy. If they couldn't buy, the merchants couldn't sell. If the merchants couldn't sell, the manufacturers couldn't produce. If the manufacturers couldn't produce, they started laying people off, and that meant less money to put into the market and start this vicious cycle. This is a necessary aspect, something that's necessary that has to happen in order for God to set the stage for a takeover. We all heard the scripture that the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, correct? Yes. How many righteous people in this room? Let me see your hands. Everybody's hand goes up high. You're not righteous because of what you did. You're righteous because of the blood of Christ. He made you righteous. I want you to understand something about covenant. In the days of Bible, when covenant was made, you would make a covenant with somebody, and to show a sign of that covenant, they would actually take their robe and cloak it around you. Now, if you're wearing your rich neighbor's robe because he gave it to you as a sign of covenant, and you come up walking into town wearing this robe, people would see me walking over the hill, walking into town, and they're like, wait a minute, who's that guy in the robe? That looks like rich Uncle Joe over here, but he walks like Troy. If I walk in wearing Uncle Joe's robe, do I still have his authority? Does the world recognize that I have full access to everything that belongs to him? But who am I? I'm still Troy. But I'm the man who entered covenant. You enter covenant with God, and you have access to that same wealth. That's the power of his grace for increase. Because of your righteousness, you have that covenant that empowers you to walk in a place of abundance. Within this realm of covenant, within this place of abundance, When the economic system collapses, where do you think people are going to want to go? They're going to be looking for economic activity. How many people relocated when they lost their jobs during the last Great Recession? How many people just up and moved because they needed to go find a job? They abandoned homes. They abandoned property. They left friends and family behind to set off to start a new life. Not because God said, I want you to go to a land that you don't know about yet, but because they says, man, I got to get a job. Yeah. When the world's economy starts to go into reset, there is going to be people all over this land who need just that. They need a job. And this is not going to be confined to America. This is not going to be confined to the North American continent. It's not going to be confined to Europe. We're talking about a global economic reset. We're talking about a famine of biblical proportions. And there are going to be people all over the world who are going to be looking for what you have. They're going to be looking to step into God's grace for increase. Now, if they come to you and you say, let me pray for you, brother. Let's say the sinner's prayer. Let's get you saved. Is that what they want? No, they need a job. They need to know why you have access to wealth, riches, and money, and they don't. They're only going to have one thing on their mind, and that's how do I feed my family? And they're going to come to those of us who are living and empowered by God's grace, standing in that river where abundance just flows. And our job is to direct those tributaries out to feed the communities. And this will create economic hotspots around the earth that become lighthouse, beacons of hope, that begin to shine God's glory and harvest many souls for the kingdom. Amen. When you hear there's a famine coming, man, you should be getting excited. You should be getting excited. If you look at famine in the Bible, the first mention of famine is when Abraham prospered. The second mention of famine is when Isaac prospered. The third mention of famine is when Joseph oversaw the greatest transference of wealth ever recorded. There's a transference of wealth that's coming. The biggest transference of wealth that we have witnessed in generations. In Isaiah 23:18, I think it's 23. God is making a proclamation against the nation of Tyre. Tyre is a merchant nation. A merchant city known for their trade. They controlled all the trade routes. So all of the goods of the world would come through Tyre. Tyre made money distributing all these goods. They were wealthy, business-driven nation. They were a market society. And God proclaimed against Tyre, and he said, I believe it's 23:18, that all of their gain would be stored up for those who dwell in Him, in God. And the phrase says, to buy food and fine clothes. So if you ever think God doesn't want you to have nice things, you better go read the Bible and see exactly what He gave to all His people who lived and dwelt in Him, who understood the power of grace that Leroy was talking about this morning, and stepped into that to just receive. Yeah. Not because of anything you do, but because you are clothed with the righteous robes of Jesus. So when people see you coming, they're saying, wow, walks like Lewis, looks like Jesus. And when you have full access, now what are the limits that you have on your life? We, of course, have to be stewards over this. We've got to take responsibility for the resources that God's put in our hands. So now we want to start looking at what we can do to plug some of the leaks that are in the bucket that we've been carrying around. Now you got two buckets in life. One bucket is going to carry all the finances, all the wealth, riches, and money and the resources that God has entrusted with you. The other one is going to carry all the tasks and burdens that you can possibly carry through your life. I'm totally convinced that the one that carries all your tasks and responsibilities through life is completely full by the time you're 14 years old. Yeah. And from that point, if you want to start something new, you've got to look in that bucket and decide what needs to come out so that you can fit this new thing in. So you've got to be ready to give something up in order to get something new. So you need to be thinking about, what in my life am I carrying around that's just dead weight, that's weighing me over, that's causing that little ache in my back? What is it that's a burden that He never meant for me to carry? Because if I can put that down in order to pick up that vision that's been sitting on the shelf, the one that I forgot about 10 years ago, the promise that God made me, that I would get to do, build, see, be part of. If I want to take that off the shelf and start carrying it around in my bucket, then what's in that bucket that needs to be getting rid of? Now, if you go back to the other bucket, the one that contains all of your resources, and you start looking at the trinkets that you've chose to buy and possess there, now you can start to see why you've got it in this bucket. Because wherever you put your money, that's where your heart is. Yes. So we start looking at the bucket where our money is. We start looking at the bucket where our resources are. And we're going to figure out what we can do to plug up some of those leaks. We all know we've got a bucket that's got a few holes in it, right? Haggai says, he who earns wages puts it into a bucket with holes in it. Who feels like that once in a while? It's like, oh, I got my paycheck. You know, there's been times when I earned a really good salary, and I haven't had a job in a little over 10 years. Nobody will hire me. I've tried. I can't even get an interview. I can't pass the computer. I don't have a formal education. I didn't even graduate high school. So anything that I've done it's been all God. And pure desperation. Got to make something work. And I've learned the hard way that if I've got to make something work, I need to spend time on my knees so God can show me how. Amen. And one of the things He showed me how was to plug the leaks in my bucket. Because you can go out and make a ton of money. But if your bucket's got a bunch of holes in it, it's just going to spill out everywhere. And then it's just going to suck the life out of you. It's going to rob your vision, and it's going to keep you blind and hopeless. Who has felt blind and hopeless? Be honest with me, please. We're empowered when we're able to control this, when we're able to plug these leaks. Jesus said you should take your money and put it into bags without holes. And we're carrying around buckets that look a little bit like this. Band-Aids stuck to it. I had a friend of mine who says that when he first heard this, it's not that his bucket had a leak, it's that the bottom was just completely blown out. We all know that feeling. You get a paycheck on Friday, and by Saturday, you're already looking 2 weeks down the road for the next paycheck. Because it's gone. Because the bucket's leaking. So let's look at some things we can do to start plugging the leaks in that bucket. Last night, I asked you to start making a list of some of your expenses. How many of you went home and did that? Some of you were like, I was supposed to do what? It's a scary task sometimes, isn't it? You know, when my wife and I settled into this, it completely transformed our lives. I started to tell you yesterday how we hit a point where we were struggling and we just didn't have enough. We had just enough. I would bite her head off when she went to the store to buy a gallon of milk. Because I knew exactly what we needed to do to make it until the next bucket of money came into our account. But I wasn't communicating that with her. So she would look in the refrigerator and go, oh, we're out of milk, and we got kids we got to take care of, and she would charge off to the store and go get milk. And then it would take about 3 days for the receipt to land on my desk, and I'm like, what happened? And you know, a trip to the store to get a gallon of milk usually costs you about $30, $40, right? Because while you're there, you might as well pick up, isn't it nice the way you walk into a grocery store and you got to get the milk that's way in the back. But in order to get there, you have to walk by the cakes and the cookies. And then on the way out, you got the gums and the candy bars. And oh, here's this fresh baked loaf of French bread. Just out of the oven, it's still warm. The bag's all steamy. You can smell it. And of course, you went there for milk for dinner, so you're hungry. So you got to buy the bread. You take it home, you have a piece, and the rest of it goes bad and you throw it away. There's a big hole in your bucket right there. When we sat down and I took a list of our expenses and our income, and I only had one contract with my company at that time, and that contract would pay us about $1,000 a week, and everything else had kind of dried up. It dried up because at the time I wasn't handling my resources properly. I wasn't honoring God with my money. Yes, I was paying my tithes, but that was it. It was very legalistic. There was no heart in it. If there's no heart in it, there's no growth in it. So I'm looking at this very legalistically. And I said, honey, here's my list of bills. Here's our income. And she went, no wonder. And we stopped. After about a 5-minute conversation, we came into agreement. We both put our hands on that list and we began to pray together, and we came together over our finances. And in that instant, it was changed. God started to open up to us ways to plug our leaky bucket. First thing you got to do is you got to review the expenses. It's like I talked about yesterday. If you don't know where your soldiers are going, then how can you tell them what to do? So you've got to start to plug that bucket. Review your expenses. Let's know where it's going. And now, how many trips to the store are you making? We literally cut almost $400 a month on average out of our grocery budget by eliminating those midweek trips to the store. We imposed a rule that says we're going to get a little more diligent about our shopping. We're going to do this more purposely. We actually started making a shopping list. Everybody makes a shopping list, right? In making that shopping list, we started to plan. How many meals do we need to cook this week? What do you think we should cook? And we didn't sit down and get overly analytical about it and go, Monday we're going to have pot roast, Tuesday we're going to have chicken, Wednesday we're going to have meatloaf, Thursday, well, hamburgers. We didn't do that. We just went, we need so many meals for so many days, and we made sure and get those things, and then we just kind of picked throughout the week. So we still had a little bit of flavor. And we could get creative and sometimes start to mix and match it. Let's try a new recipe. Put some fun in it. But then our rule said, if we run out of something in the middle of the week, I don't care what it is, we are not allowed to go to the store and get it. Now, not only does that save a little bit of frustration of, oh no, I got to run to the store, but how many hundreds of dollars do you spend every week when you go to the store for just a gallon of milk? Because like we already said, you walk in, you get the gallon of milk, you leave with the cookies and the French bread. Oh, and as you walk down the aisle with the cake mixes. Or you saw something and you see a picture of it all cooked on the box and you think, well, that looks really good. I've never tried that before. I'll try that. Yeah, I think we just went through, probably about a year ago, my wife went through our pantry to get rid of all the stuff that was expired. You know how many box dinners we'd had in our pantry for years that looked good while we were shopping that way? And she would pull it out and go, oh, this expired 3 years ago. Isn't it good that we spent that money, though? That looks so good, and we didn't enjoy it at all. And you know, you get it home, and it never tastes as good as it looks on the box anyway, right? So then you think, I'm never going to do that again, but you've still got 3 others that you picked up the same week. We literally cut about $400 a month out of our grocery bill with this one simple strategy. How many of you could use a few $100s extra a month in your pocket? What can you do with a few $100 extra a month? That becomes seed that you start to put in your silo. Because remember, you've got to have seed in your silo. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, let me hit this real quick. Too often we eat the seed that we put in our silo. And if we don't have any savings, if we don't have any money put aside, then we'll never have an opportunity to invest in a field in order to grow a crop and bring a return. So when we make those midweek trips to the grocery store, we were eating the seed. What else can you do to eat the seed? How many of you got a cell phone? I love my friend Ronnie back here this morning. Somebody asked him for a phone number. He goes, I haven't had a cell phone in how many years, Ronnie? 9? Here's a man who runs a business. He's always doing transactions throughout the city. Oh, and he's in a real estate business, which is a very reactionary business. Do I have any other realtors in here? You know how reactionary it can be. Phone rings, man, I got to take that call. Here's a man who's been doing this and hasn't had a cell phone in 9 years. Do you need a cell phone? I look around at all the cell phones today are monstrous. They're huge, and they're awesome what they can do. Don't get me wrong, I carry a smartphone. It's smarter than I am. It knows how to spell words I never even knew existed. So many of you, if you get a text from me, it'll say something, I don't know what it said, but apparently the phone got it figured out. It was very smart. But how much do you need to spend on that cell phone? Do you need the latest, greatest, biggest thing? I've learned to look at a cell phone kind of like a computer. What do I really need it for? These are the tasks that I need it to complete. So do I really need the Mac Daddy, or can I get by with this one? So I actually switched my cell phone, and I bought a little smartphone that cost about $100. Doesn't feel an ounce of pain to me to just drop $100 and buy a cell phone that I don't have to pay for over a 2-year contract. And all of the carriers today offer no contract plans. So I'm able to get access to unlimited everything with my cell phone and my iPad that I've got to have on a roving data plan for what I do with business. And it costs me $43 a month. Some of you are going, I'm paying way more than that. Could that be another leak in the bucket? Having more service than we actually need. Cell phones become a huge expense. And some people will go out and buy a cell phone just because that's the image I've got to have. This is the latest, greatest gadget. There was a computer I saw years ago. Guy's driving down the road in his classic car, the top's down, he's all happy, he's got his arm on this box and the camera zooms in and the box says, the new T4 computer. And the music's singing and he's playing and he's driving along and he comes up to a stop sign and you see him go like this and all of a sudden the music stops, his face droops and the camera flips to the billboard. It says, introducing the new T5. Isn't that how we are? We've got to have the latest, greatest thing. What really changed in technology? I could pick on Apple for just a second here. So Siri was great when it came out on the iPhone 4S, right? Siri hasn't changed at all, but the phone's gotten bigger and more expensive and people still have to have it. Now, if that's what you need and that works for you, by all means, get what you need. But you really need to look and say, what do I need? Is that something I want, or is it something I need? I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me and say, I know the Word says that God supplies all my needs. And this month, I need money to pay my rent. Okay? Why don't you have money to pay your rent? I don't know, it just hasn't come in. But they're sitting there looking at the big new Mac Daddy phone. You got to wonder. They drove up in a new car. Oh, you see, you made the car payment. Yeah, I can't lose my car. Well, what about your rent? One of the biggest things we need to realize is God will always provide your needs, but sometimes He gives you just what you need, and you went out and bought what you wanted instead. And then we wonder why. God, why don't you bless me with more resources? God, why don't you bless me with riches? God, how come you don't give me more money? It's because you earn wages and you put it into a bucket that leaks. You need to look at that. How many times do you go eat out? Oh, now I get this one. Especially if you're working all day, you come home, you're tired, and it's your job to cook dinner. The last thing you want to do is crack open that refrigerator, start mixing up a meal, dirty up some dishes that then have to be cleaned up too, and actually try to cook for everybody. And to make it even worse, the kids are going to go, Mom, I'm not eating that. So out of convenience and frustration, we just tell everybody, get in the car. Let's go. And now how many times and how much money do you spend doing that? Out of convenience. A little bit of planning, a little bit of strategy, and you could have ready-to-go meals that you can take home and cook in 20 minutes or less. And all the grocery stores that I shop in set up these booths. Like if you walk into Publix, I see them in Winn-Dixie, and they've got these booths where they're trying to sell product, so they give you recipe cards, 20-minute meals. They'll even cook up samples there for you. In fact, if you time it right on a Saturday, you can get free lunch by going to the different grocery stores. And that'll save you from having to spend money eating out that day. My wife's back there going, he actually does that. Can I say, I like to experiment, try new things. How much money would you save if you cut down on dining out? Now, I use a computer program. Who uses a computer program to track their money? It's one of the greatest things out there. You know what disappointed me years ago in 2010? Microsoft announced they were no longer going to make their program called Money. They said there was no market for it. Oh. Today, people do what? Online banking. And instead of balancing a checkbook, we log on to see how much money we've got. You know, it can still take up to 6 months for an ATM transaction to actually clear your bank. It can take that long for it to post on your credit card. I know it sounds ridiculous in today's instant society. Don't get me wrong, online banking is great. Sometimes I watch it a little too much. My wife will tell you there's a couple of times I'll just call her in the middle of the day. What are you doing at Walmart? And it's not that I really care she's spending money. I just want to know what she's doing without me. So online banking can be great, but it's not instantaneous. How many times have you felt the sting of an overdraft fee because something charged against your account when you weren't really planning on it or expecting it? Oh, yeah. And these banks today are making money hand over fist on these fees. They will tell you that you can have the convenience of overdraft protection. Don't worry, you'll never have a bounce check. When you swipe your card to pay groceries and you don't have enough money, we'll cover it for you. And if you go to open up an account, they're going to slip that paper in front of it and tell you that it's just some major convenience. It's the same lie that Mammon used to sell that revolving balance story back in 1959. And now they're going to get you to sign on this line and give them permission to charge you $30 to $40 every time you spend more than you've got in your account. It's convenient. They'll cover it for you. My brother, bless his heart, hooked up his daughter with a new cell phone on his plan. She decided to go into the App Store and download a few things. $900 worth of stuff. And he calls me and says, what do I do? Well, you pretty much got to pay the bill. You know, with some of these cell phone providers, in order to have the App Store active, you've already got a credit card on file, and they're going to charge it. Good luck contesting that charge. He tried, he paid. Oh, but the bank was helping him because at the account he'd opened, they also slipped him that little paper that says, we'll cover all your overdrafts, no problem. Those $900 in fees cost him a little over $1,400 to pay off. Ouch, who's ready for that? Talk about a leaky bucket. How many of you have kids on a cell phone plan? Can I tell you what I did with my kids? Are you ready? We know how kids are. I wanted them to learn a little bit of responsibility. So when each one of them turned 14, we went and bought them a cell phone. One of those monthly pay-as-you-go contract plans. And we made it their responsibility to earn the money to pay the bill and keep their phone going. If Ronnie back here can run a business and not have a cell phone for 9 years, my 14-year-old definitely doesn't need one. She just needs to go to school and come home. If she gets in trouble at school, they'll call me. I don't need her texting me going, this class is boring. How many hundreds of dollars a month do you think I save by doing that? How much responsibility do you think my kids learned? I created monsters. Consider your ways. The Bible says very clearly we're supposed to consider our ways. Haggai says, consider your ways. Take a look at your finances. Where is your money going? If you don't know where it's going, how can you tell it what to do when it gets there? And if you don't control it, then what?
It will control you.
It will control you all the time. The meek will inherit the earth. We talked about meekness last night. Meekness is what? Using less than the full ability that's given to you. We talked last night how Jesus was the perfect picture of meekness. A man who was God, who lived as a man, who had access to everything from heaven, who knew he could call down lightning in a flash to deal with any problem. And yet look what he endured for us. He allowed people to nail him to a cross. How many of you would be kicking and screaming and crying, Lord, don't let this, why are you letting this happen to me? What did I do? He did less than we did, a whole lot less. That's meekness displayed. We're not meek with our money. Not when we go to the grocery store to buy the $30 or $40 gallon of milk and all the accessories that go with it. Not when we load up our kids with things that they really don't need. The latest, greatest cell phone monster so that they can be the trendy kids at school with everybody else. I loved a couple weeks ago sitting at dinner at a friend's house. And my buddy's sitting there with a phone that was a hand-me-down from his son. I thought, now, there's a smart man. The meek will inherit the earth. We've got to learn to be meek with our finances. It starts by taking control and learning where it's going. Consider your ways. Not overspending, and also not overbooking your time. Let me just hit this one for just a second. How many of you will get called and somebody will tell you, oh, look, I really need your help on this. Come on, why don't you do this with me? And you say, yes. And then the closer that day comes, the more heartsick you get. Because you know you're not supposed to be there, but you just said you were going to do it. You committed yourself to do something that your heart's not even in. Who's been there? Jesus said to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Yes. So now you've said it. You don't wait till Saturday morning when you're supposed to show up and go help to call and say, I can't make it. Because you already committed yourself, now you have to go. And instead of canceling, I recommend that you do go so that you can suffer the pain of being somewhere that you're not supposed to be so you can learn. I don't want to do that again. Time is more valuable than any money. And we will sell our time in exchange for a few dollars so often. Or we'll commit our time doing something that we have no business doing instead of working on an activity that will allow God to bless us with increase. You've got to manage your time. You've got to manage your resources. You've got to effectively do this. You be meek with your time and your money, and God will open up opportunities for you to increase. Now, what you can start as you list your expenses, let's also start tackling some of your debt. I know not everybody in here has debt, but how many of you would like to eliminate what you've got? Now, let me tell you, I'm not one of those guys that's completely against debt. I see its place and I see its purpose. People ask me, what's up with debt? Well, you've got to have a credit score in today's society. I've actually suffered the pain of being turned down for a job at a time when I really, really needed that job to provide for my family. I'd interviewed with the company. There was a spot opening up for a regional director over the whole state. I was experienced. I'd already run this operation in other states. And they looked at me and said, your timing's perfect. Get everything ready. We're going to get you started in about 2 weeks. And a week and a half later, they called and said, I'm sorry, we can't extend that offer. We did the background check. Your credit score is not good enough. We can't hire you. That hurt. It was at a time when I didn't have a lot of money. So we were living off our credit cards. So my credit balances were going up and my credit score was going down, and it cost me the job. Never again. You've got to have a credit score. So you've got to learn to manage it. We don't have time to get into that today. But I would just tell you this. Don't eliminate your credit. If you've got credit cards, you need to pay it off. Take them out of your purse. Take them out of your wallet. Maybe take one emergency card. Stick it in a bowl. Fill the bowl with water. Put it in the freezer. That's your emergency card. If it gets bad enough that you have to actually get a hammer out and take that bowl and break it to get to that card, you probably need it. But you're not going to use it to take yourself out to Emerald's for dinner tonight, are you? No. That won't be enough of an emergency to go through that much work, because in the process of doing that work, you're going to have time to think about it and go, this isn't really a smart thing. Let me fill the bowl back up and put it away again. But it is good to have a little bit of credit. There's times when I think a car loan is okay. We live in a society today that is called an urban sprawl. You know, I had a client up in Wilmington, Delaware. Driving across the state of Delaware takes less time than driving across the city of Orlando. Especially at certain times of the day, and the way our red lights are, there can be a lot of time. I'd hired employees that didn't have transportation. They would ride the bus. And it would take them almost 3 hours on the bus to get to work, and the schedule never permitted for them to really get there on time. I honestly didn't really believe that the schedule wouldn't permit it until I looked at the schedule and I went, oh, yeah, it doesn't really work. So maybe you need a car to get to work so you can generate the income that you need to accept the provision that God's blessing you with. But you do not need a big, expensive, brand new car when you can get a good used car for about half the price, and it fills your purpose. Consider exactly what you're purchasing. It has a cost. And then if you do go buy that car with a note, don't just make the minimum payments. Let's pay it off. Do you know how many tens of thousands of dollars in interest you can save by just paying your debt off early? Now, I like those reward credit cards. Those are cool. The ones that give cash back, they only work if you actually pay the balance in full every month. Otherwise, they make it up in interest 10 times over. But if you can pay it in full every month, how about this for found money? Use a credit card that gives you cash back bonus. Use it to take care of some expenses. Leave your cash in the bank, pay the credit card at the end of the month, and now take the cash back that they give you and put it in your silo that you can invest to receive more increase. If you're struggling with credit, don't go out here and try that. Pay it off first. The way to pay it off is you can start your priority payoff chart. Sit down and list everything that you owe. What do you have on cars, credit cards, mortgages? And let's prioritize. There's two schools of thought on this. One says to take the highest interest rate and put it at the top and pay that one off first. The other one says to take the lowest balance and put that at the top and pay that off first. Now here's where you've got to consider your own personality type. If you are a planner, a strategist, the engineer type, then go for the highest interest rate, because you'll understand the logic that gets there. But if you're the more phlegmatic, carefree type personality, go for the lowest balance, because you need a victory. And you'll pay off that lowest balance and you'll see one of them go to zero. Oh, and leave that zero on your payoff chart too, because that's your victory. Now, if you make this list of your debts, we've got our balance, our credit line, our interest rate. You can negotiate a new rate with your credit card company. How about this trick? I'm going to call up MasterCard and say, I'm sorry, I know I've been making payments on time, but I'm just going to have to default. You're going to do what? Yeah, money's gotten real tight. Your interest rate is so high, I just can't afford to make this payment anymore. And it's either pay you or it's feed my family. And I'm sorry, my family wins. I can't afford to pay this. You're going to get transferred to a supervisor real quick who's going to work out some kind of a structure with you, more than likely negotiate a lower rate so that you can still keep paying them. And what does that now do to your payment? I'm not encouraging you to actually default. But if you call your credit card company and you start talking to them, asking them to adjust the rate, they will make adjustments. So you can roll over and pay that 24 or 29% interest. Do you know why credit card companies go to places like Delaware? Where's one of the other ones? North Carolina? You know why? Because those states actually have laws that allow these credit card companies to charge higher rates. So that's why they have relocated into those places where those states will allow them to charge 29% interest. Anybody mail a credit card payment to anywhere in Florida where the cap is 18%? These banks know how to get your money. They know how to get your fees. I could get started on bank fees. I hate checking account fees. Anybody pay fees to a checking account? I always tell the bank, you need my money to be in business and you want to charge me for that privilege? That's not how it works. If you sit down and you talk with your account representative, they will find a way to get you into something where you can eliminate fees. They always have an option. Maybe it's a minimum balance option. I walked into a bank with my 18-year-old daughter. She turned 18. She'd been on a high school checking account where Daddy could monitor, and she did not want Daddy seeing her account every time he logged in online. She wanted to be free. So she says, Dad, would you go to the bank with me and help open this account? I said, sure, let's go. We sat down, and I sat like this, watching my baby girl talk to that account rep and tell her, I don't want to pay any fees. And she didn't say, I'm not paying fees. She looked right at the account rep and says, how can we set this up for free? And the account rep starts to explain the charges in the account. And my baby girl says, no, you don't understand. I don't like to pay fees. How can we do this for free? So that account rep says, well, we do have a program here that if you set up on an automatic savings deposit, we can waive all your banking fees. So she set it up knowing my payday is this day. I've got an automatic deposit into my savings account that happens on this date, and it totally eliminated her having any fees at the bank. Even if that fee is only $5 a month, what does that add up to over the year? $60. How would that extra $60 look in your silo? That's an extra handful of seed you can spread around the crop field, right? And grow for increase. When you start paying down your debt, you can add up all of the payments. The one that you pay off first is going to have a number assigned to it, right? When it's paid off, what do you do with that money? Roll it on to the next one. So now if you got 5 payments and they're all $100 each, you pay off the first one. Now you got that extra $100. You apply it to the second one. Now you're making $200 a month payments. How fast are you paying that off? We pay that off. Now you add it to the next one. Now you're paying $300. All of a sudden, you're gaining speed. Then you get to the next one, $400. And when you get to the last one, how fast is that one gone? Now, if you're not deep in debt, could you use this same strategy to apply into your savings? I'm going to pay myself a little bit. It's going to start growing. We're going to talk about interest in investing a little later today. But can you see how this could build and you could start exponentially paying yourself more and more? What happens when you start investing and you start developing other income streams? And those other income streams start bringing in and you're able to start peeling off the top of that. When I get my cashback rewards check every month, which goes from about $200 to $500, we use our credit cards for business, and some months business is not cheap to run. So we get a pretty good percentage back every month. How nice do you think that looks when it gets deposited into my savings account? Makes me so happy. I didn't have to do anything for that money, and yet it still comes in. And when I take a percentage of that, and I start also paying that into my silo, am I now exponentially increasing upon my own? But you got to eliminate the debt first. You got to get rid of that. So you look at your expenses. You start plugging the leaks in the bucket. Now, here's one of the most important things, and I think most people in this room get this. But I want to talk about giving. Giving is more for you than anything else. If you're not giving, then you're holding on to that idol of silver and gold. You're caressing it. You're worshiping it. It's your precious. How many of you saw that movie? What happened to that guy? What was his name? Smeagol? You remember him? How scrawny and twisted he was with his one little tuft of hair running around. My precious. That's how some of us are with our money. I just got $1,000 in. I paid it all out. I got $10 left. It's precious. God says, give. I would if I had it, Lord, but it's you or groceries. And my kids are hungry. Anybody ever been there? We've all been there. Let's be real. It can be hard to give until you really grab a hold of it. Then it's fun. Then you start running around looking for places. Oh, where can I give? Then you start trusting God because He's going to show you places where you should give and places where you shouldn't give. He's going to show you things that you need to support and other things that seem real good, but He didn't call you to support that. Giving is for you more than it's for anybody else. I love being in this place to be able to talk about this because I'm not taking an offering because I don't need your money. You need to find a place to give it so that God can bless you, because if you don't open up that channel, then what's He going to be able to put into your hand? You got to grab a hold of this. Giving is so vitally important. And if you stop at 10%, now you're living according to the law. And if you're living according to the law, is there any room for grace? There is no room for grace. When my wife and I sat down and we were looking at our expenses, one of the biggest problems we had was we had debt at that time. I'm showing her the list of our expenses and our little bit of income that was coming in because we hadn't plugged the leaks in our bucket. Because just as the word says, we earn wages and we'd put it into a bucket that had holes in it. We couldn't keep any of it because the Lord would blow it away. We were being legalistic and we were tithing, but God, I tithed. Yeah, but your heart's not in it. You're giving out of law. You're giving out of an expectation. I'm going to give you 10, Lord, but you better give me back 100 because I need it to pay my bills. That's an expectation. That turns God into a sugar daddy. How many of you know that does not work? That was one of the big problems we had with the prosperity movement that came out. One of the big problems. And that is one of the reasons why we're not allowed to talk about money in the typical church today. Because as soon as somebody starts talking, people shut down and go, oh, there's just another guy who wants my money. He's going to tell me that if I give him $1,000 today, I'll get a check for $10,000 in my mailbox tomorrow. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. Giving is for you. It's not even for the person that you're giving to. It has nothing to do with that. This is why it's so cool to be able to give in secret. You know, when God talks about giving, He talks about those who will give openly and publicly so that they could get the reward from man. And those who would give secretly. And which ones did He say were blessed? Those who gave secretly. Those who gave with the right heart. Giving is a vital important of your financial health. Currency is a river. Money is called currency, and it must flow just like that river. And if you put your hand in the water and you scoop it up and you do like this, how much are you going to get to drink? But if you hold your hand in the water and then begin to lap from your hand as the water flows over it, is there any end to what you can drink? If you try to capture it, it'll stagnate and kill you. You won't be enough. But if you allow your hand to be open and it flows. If somebody dumps a pail of water on my hand right now, how much am I going to keep? As much as fits right there in that little cup of the palm of my hand. Is that enough? Yes or yes? If it's constantly flowing, is that enough? We have a view of money that fits either one picture or another. And I loved how it was described best. I heard it described by a man named Rabbi Daniel Lapin. And I love this analogy the best. He said, you're either going to see money like cake or you're going to see money like candles. If you see money like cake, then you know there's only a 6x9 sheet cake sitting in front of you. And as soon as you take a piece off and hand it to somebody, it's gone. So everybody scrambles to get their piece of cake before it's gone. But if you see money like the candles on the cake that are burning with the flame, you know that you can take one candle off and anything you touch that candle to begins to burn. And there's no end to what you can set ablaze with that one candle. So how do you see it? Is it cake or is it candles? If it's cake, you're less likely to give because you're afraid there won't be enough left for you. If it's candles, you know you can never give enough because the more you give, the more you're going to be able to ignite in others the hope, the message of prosperity. And the more you're going to be able to step deeper into that river of increase that God pours out on you. And it comes with giving. The Bible says a generous man will prosper. Now this defies all logic. The world system today tells us that you got to get a good education, you got to go work hard at a good job, and you got to start saving, and you got to investing, and that's the only way to wealth. How many of you know you will never ever be able to save enough to provide for your latter years in life? Amen. It can't happen. And that wrong teaching is why 98% of us finish this race either dead or dead broke. Because we don't get it. The Bible says a generous man will prosper. There are so many different ways to be generous. An employer is generous when he or she starts to hire people. Because having been in business, I can tell you there comes a place in business where you know, if I expand, I have to earn less because it's going to cost me money to expand. So how many of us then stay small? So many people will go out and start a business and all they do is really get their own job and they own that job. And they never hire anybody to go work in that job because they want to try to make it all themselves. They don't want to spend anything to go hire somebody else. And they put themselves into worse bondage than they were when they were employed by another company. Because at least when you're an employee, you can call in sick, you can take vacations, you got holiday weekends, you get a little bit of time. But when you own your own job, can you ever call in sick? But if you step into a place where you can be generous enough to actually employ somebody and begin to empower them to have resources to live their life, are you now in a place where God can prosper you? That is one form of generosity. Just flat out giving for the sake of giving is the greatest form of generosity. A generous man will prosper. Who wrote those words? Are those the words according to Troy? No. Where does that come from? Comes from Proverbs, which is the word of God. I heard Solomon, who was a servant of God, who instituted a form of community, kingdom community, that we need to step back into in this earth. From generosity. Luke says, give and it will be given to you. Now I cut out the middle of that section because we've all heard it misquoted so much. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, so give into my ministry and you can have it all. But look at the second part. With the same measure that you use it, it'll be measured back to you. When my wife and I sat down and made our list of bills, and we had all of these expenses and all of these things that we could just barely meet, and it just wasn't working, we said we need more money. So I had this great plan. I had already made up my mind that I hated debt. It had built up over a couple of years because of a series of life's incidents, because I was eating the seed. I didn't have any seed in the silo. So when we had an emergency, like a flat tire at the side of the road, and I needed to buy a new tire, it went on my credit cards. And then because I was still eating the seed, I'm making the payment instead of paying the balance. Huge difference. Flat tire should never be a life-altering catastrophe, should it? But it can be for many of us. So we sat down and we started looking at this. And I says, all right, I got an idea. I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to use our cars as collateral to get a loan to consolidate these bills. And if we do this and we pay this, we can have it all paid off in about 14 months. We came together in an agreement. She's like, okay, I don't see any other way. Let's do it. The bank turned us down because we owed too much. Ever get turned down for a loan because you owe too much? It's probably the greatest thing that could have happened because it left me with only one option. I had to pray. You ever get to the end of your road where there's nothing left to do but pray? God, I've tried everything. And you know what God shows me? He said, give. And he shows me this in Luke 6:36. In the same measure you use it, it will be measured back to you. And it came at me as a challenge. When he shared this with me, it no longer became words on a page. It leaped off and became life. And it was as if he was challenging me, going, go ahead, give a little extra. I dare you. Sometimes that's all I need to hear. I dare you. Those were the worst words somebody could say to me before I was saved. We won't get into that. So we started giving. In fact, based on this challenge, we doubled our giving. And God paid off our debt in 45 days. I was going to have to get a consolidation loan and do it according to the world's ways, and it was going to take me 14 months. I doubled my giving. I couldn't make my bills to begin with. I doubled my giving. I started giving 20% instead of 10. 45 days. How many of you could use an intervention of God in your finances like that? Come on. We talked about the 10% going to you, and I want to talk a little bit about giving and something God shared with me in the relation to this. I like this quote. It basically says that giving blesses you more than it does the one you give to. How many of you could use a blessing? Everybody should be going, woohoo, me! And you know what's so cool is being able to come in here and say this? Is you all know I have no ulterior motive. The only thing I want is to see you empowered with the truth so that you can be free to go pursue the calling that God has given you. And this is one of the key things that's going to help you do it. It is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. One of the things we've always teach is that if you want to get what you want, go help somebody else get what they want. And it just happens along the way. The American society says, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make a way. There is no such thing as a self-made man or woman. Because every successful person that you see out there is surrounded by a group of people that help them to get there. I would not be standing up here today if it wasn't for the team from SoCo that helped put this together. If it wasn't for Leroy's help in coming alongside, and Keith's help and support in putting this together, and their willingness to come up here. Because there is no self-made individual. It is a community effort that gets us there. And in order to do that, you must be a bit generous. Who's heard of R.G. Letourneau? Great man. He's got a book called Movers of Mountain and Men. Here's a man who built a business during the Great Depression. You know, the Great Depression was an economic famine. And here's a man who gets this crazy idea to build a contraption that you tow behind a tractor that digs up dirt. He's a big guy who realized a shovel, or a big kid who realized a shovel wasn't big enough and he wanted to move more dirt than he could fit on his shovel. So today's earth movers are technology that this man developed. And he is given credit for moving more earth around the world between the Great Depression and World War II than had ever been moved by all men before. Great man who partnered his business with God. As you read his story, there's a time in there where he hits a particularly tight year, and at the end of the year he just doesn't have much money, and his company's struggling, and he's facing bankruptcy, and he came to the end of the road where he only had one thing left to do. What was that one thing? He prayed. And he asked God, why? And God says, aren't we supposed to be partners? Where's my share? And he realized that he had not given back to God, and his business was drying up. He made the covenant with God, the same covenant that Isaac made in Genesis 26. When Isaac made that covenant, he sowed in a time of famine and reaped a crop of 100-fold. When R.G. Letourneau made that covenant with God, he started building a business during a time of economic famine that we know as the Great Depression. And he grew a business that moved around the world. There's stories of him and his company rolling into town to set up shop on a train. The train would unload. They would stack up buildings and houses and factories. And immediately, there's a small little city right there. He would allow ministers from the community to come in, and he would open up the floor during lunchtime for them to share the word. To any of his employees that wanted to hear it were free to attend. He had more support from his employees than most of us feel from our friends. Because he was a generous man and not only gave to God, but he gave opportunity to those who worked with him. He rolled into Indiana. He rolled into a little town in Georgia that was economically depressed. He heard about an Air Force base that closed in Texas, and he went in and bought the Air Force base and took all of his people with him. This is a picture of what Abraham did when he went up against the 5 kings to save his brother Lot. And R.G. Letourneau takes a bunch of metal workers, machinists, and mechanics, and guys who know how to move dirt, and moves into a city and sets up an entire economic structure that then provides for that city. He established 2 cities in Africa using this principle of moving in with economic activity to provide for the local community. All because he partnered with God. And his cry, his claim to it all says you cannot outgive God. You need to consider your relationship with God. I had this conversation with God in a hotel room one day. Doing a training for a client of mine up in Jacksonville several years ago, and I'm up in the morning and I'm praying and I'm spending time with God. And how many of you have heard the concept that time is money? We know that time is our single most valuable resource. We can never get it back. And we always trade our time for money because we've been trained to equate anything we put out needs a financial return, so time is money. So God starts talking to me and he says, is time really money? Let's take a look at this. If you always put your money where your heart is, where is your time going? You will always spend your time on the things that are important to you. Always. When somebody says, I don't have time, it just means, oh, you've got other priorities. Because the truth is, you will always find the money and you will always find the time to do the things that you value. Amen. It doesn't matter. When I was homeless, I had money for the things I wanted. When I should have been spending it on the things I needed. So consider your time in your relationship. If there's 30 days in a month, on average, every 30 days, how many hours does that translate to in a month? 720 hours. So now, if I've got 720 hours in a month, and I decide I'm going to tithe 10% of my time into my relationship with my wife, how many days every month am I spending with my wife? 3 days, 72 hours. Now, if I'm only spending 72 hours out of every month with my wife, how good is our relationship?
Not so much.
Not so good. If we're only giving 10% of our income to God, we're only giving Him 10% of our heart. How good is that relationship? Now let's take the argument and start talking, do we tithe on our tenth or our gross, on our net or our gross? Well, if there's 720 hours in a month, are you awake all 720 hours? No. So if you sleep an average of 8 hours a day, that means you're awake for now 480 hours. So that's your net time that you have every month. So let's tithe off your net. Now if I put that 48 hours into the relationship with my wife, do you think after 21 years we'd still be happily married? How good would our relationship be? If it wasn't good enough to only give her 72 hours out of every month, how much less would it be if I only gave her 48? If time is money, then how are you using your money to honor God? How are you investing in the relationship that you have with the Almighty? Some of you need to ponder that just a little bit and start thinking, what do I really value? What do I really value? We don't want to give because we're afraid of what? Commitment? God, I'd love to give to you. I just need more. I love this. You've got a 30-year mortgage, a 5-year car lease, a lifetime gym membership, but she says to him, you're afraid of commitment. God says, I want you to give. I want you to give of your time, your talent, and your resources. And we're worried about, do we want to give off the net or the gross? What's the real rule involved here, God? And God says, no. This is about commitment. You to me and me to you. This is about covenant relationship. If you join with me, I will show you supernatural ways that you can pay off your debt. I will make provision for you to be able to reap a harvest and bring in an increase that will put you in a place where you can give even more and start blessing others around you. You know, the purpose of money is to provide for community. It's not for you. If it was for you, God would have made a way for us to take it with us when we leave this earth. But nobody's been able to do that yet. Many have tried. It doesn't work. But yet we spend all our lives trying to get it, when we should be spending our lives honoring the relationship and the covenant and the commitment. God made it to us when He sent Jesus on that cross. Now are you going to honor that covenant and enter into commitment with Him and start honoring Him with your money? And that starts when you consider your ways, plug the leaks in the bucket, and find an opportunity to be able to give more to Him. Amen? One step at a time, folks. That's how we're going to get there. It doesn't happen overnight. But I can promise you, when you involve God, He will accelerate the best laid plans that you can come up with yourself. Let's take a break. Got about 10 minutes, okay?